as far as the where you are, the check marks mean you're fine. The only one that has an open item is the allocation for non-represented employees, and that's not necessarily because we see a problem there. It's just always the last one we do. So I think we sent the emails to Jamar and Abe and the city today, touching on all the union allocations, letting them know that those are fine. We'll check this one off, or we'll check this one and let you know if there are any problems. But this is the nitty gritty detail of what we review every year and why it takes longer than a day or two to do it. Ashley, did you join the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, why don't you take folks through the revenue overview then?
Sure. So we'll take a look at the difference between the 21 budget and the 22, just to review the different variances and see where the city is positioning itself to be in terms of next year's budget. So there's about a $2 million increase over the budgeted amount for last year, primarily due to two major items, being the increase in the rental payments from the RPA, as you all know, through the negotiations that occurred earlier this year to reestablish the contract. So that way the $1.4 million is included in the 2020 budget to be received from the parking authority, as well as an increase in the prior year property tax revenue. I won't belabor you too much with all the numbers and the information here, but the high level is that most of the revenue items, there are small increases, but we'll talk a bit more about the real estate tax on the next slide. With the earned income tax, we'll also talk a bit more about that in a second. But taking a look at the other Act 511 taxes, you'll see that's the other largest increase over last year's budgeted amounts, primarily driven by that real estate transfer tax budget target that over the past years has consistently been increasing because the city has been collecting more and more in real estate transfer tax revenue. So that's something that you're going to see continuing to increase next year. Same thing with the business privilege tax and the occupation tax revenues. There's about a 12.5% and a 17.5% increase in those over last year's budgeted amounts. In the license permits and fees, which we'll also talk about a bit more, the city is anticipating an increase in some of the permitting revenues collected from the issuance of permits. And so there's about $100,000 increase there. And then what you'll see here in the glaring red, the employee health contribution in terms of prescription drug, that $1.6 million kind of variance. It's just the city wasn't budgeting previously that way. That item is shown also on the expenditure side, so it balances out. But we just pulled that out here so it doesn't inflate the other revenue category to make it seem as though there's a much more significant drop than there is. And we can go to the next slide. And so for the real estate tax, there's about a 4.4% increase in the total taxes, but primarily driven by that increase in the prior year revenue. So prior to the pandemic, the city has received the actual amount collected has surpassed the budgeted amount. And as we saw in 2020, the city did not collect as much as it anticipated in prior year revenue. Maybe due to the extended deadline, but the amount collected through the first 3 quarters of this year is actually still is just about what the budget target was for 2021. And so the city is anticipating an increase in next year's budget target as well to return to the normal range that was budgeted prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, the one other thing to note here is on the current year revenue, and I think you guys have probably already discussed this. The reason that your revenues are up is I think your the hotel is now on your tax rolls.
Yep.
So that adds into your that they become part of the tax base. So without having to change the tax rate, you have a large addition to the tax base, and that generates revenue.
Okay, and so one thing to certainly note with the EIT revenue is that, let me just take a sec here. There's about a 270,000 increase in EIT, total EIT revenue being calculated for, budgeted for the general fund. However, it's important to take a look at the resident portion since due to Act 47, all commuter EIT next year is going to go to the capital fund, and then it's only going to be able to be levied for about half the year since the city is slated to exit Act 47 next in the middle of next year. And so taking a look at what's going on with the resident portion, which is what's going to be contributing to the general fund, is important. And so when we look at that in the graph shown here, the current year revenues from Reading residents has actually been growing, has declined significantly worse than it has for the commuter growth. So that growth that's going to the capital fund was actually is greater than the amount of resident EIT that the city is collecting. And with that, the 22 budget is anticipating that the prior year revenues would increase and the current year EIT revenue in the general fund would remain flat, where it was at about the $20.5 million for the current year revenue.
Yeah, so the thing to note here is that this has been the biggest driver of your financial performance on the revenue side, right? It's the thing that grows by pre-pandemic 5 to 7%, and it's the revenue that kind of covers a lot of other shortfalls when they happen. Now that revenue is the real estate transfer tax, but before, for a long time, it was the EIT. And you can see if we set aside the commuter tax and that thing which is going away and the shift between funds, you can see that revenues from residents, the people who live in Reading, is down. And it's down 6.1%, which is a different way of saying you either have fewer people employed or the people who are employed are making less money. The overall trend is minus 2%. So if everybody, including the commuters, is down 2 and the residents are down 6, then what that tells you is that the residents are being hit and hurt more by the pandemic than the commuters are. Not a shocking revelation, but if somebody said, well, how much more? This is the answer.
And another way to look at this would be, we've been monitoring COVID, the city's EIT results from Berk's EIT since last year. Well, we've been monitoring them since we've been involved with the city, but just this chart here shows the earnings through kind of the recovery period of what's going on since the pandemic has initially started. And so just to take a note, the text at the bottom mentions the significance of timing in this, since there is a lag at which the EIT is levied and when it actually arrives in the city. So that's why you'll see our Q2 earnings kind of show that August through October period, and why the dates are the way they are. But what this graph is showing is that they were down about 10% in the first quarter, if we're following the yellow bars here, yep, and then about 3% in the second quarter, so not as low, but still lower, and then about 14% higher. So there was an increase in those pre-pandemic levels, in the EIT revenue in comparison to pre-pandemic levels. And then the third quarter, there was another kind of drop, about 11%. So that's actually worse than when the pandemic first hit. So this fluctuation that we're seeing and the total amount of EIT revenue is just generally showing what's on the header here is that the recovery is not linear. There has been an increase and decrease in the amount of revenue in comparison to prior years. And so setting aside the real estate tax, the earned income tax, the other Act 511 taxes, there is a small, anticipated little or no growth at all in the non-tax revenues in the 22 budget. The primary thing we highlight here is the admissions fee in the charges for service category that's directly tied to attendance at events. And so, as you can imagine, the decrease that we see here in 2020, how much shorter it was of the budget target, we know that's primarily due to the shutdowns and closures that occurred. So there was no revenue being collected in terms of fee attendance. However, the 22 budget is anticipating that it remains at the 2020 budgeted target of 200,000, which isn't where it was pre-pandemic, but it's still, aligning to show some sort of increase in this revenue category. And when we look at permit fee activity, as a group of one of the sets of license permits and fees that charged by the city, we see here that it kind of fluctuates. It depends on the amount of activity and volume of requests for permits that are occurring, which shows like whether people are building things in the city. And so the budget target for that over the year, as indicated by the blue line, shows that when the city has had an increase in permitting activity, the next year the budget target goes up. And when there was, as you can see, through 18, and then it went down in 19, and so that's showing a decrease prior to the pandemic. And then we see what happened in 2020. However, the 2021 and 22 budget target kind of assumes that there's going to be a slight increase, about 50,000 more in new construction, and then altogether about $95,000 more than it was budgeted for last year.
So the reason we took you through this is I think one of the questions that I anticipate one of the questions that would be on your mind as you go through this is, okay, I know the pandemic dropped revenues almost everywhere, right? Except for the real estate transfer tax, which has been gangbusters, for a couple of years now. Real estate taxes were lower because the collection rate was a little lower. EIT revenues were down for obvious reasons. Licenses and permits were down for obvious reasons. Admissions tax were down. And so the question is, how much has it come back, right? The pandemic isn't over, but a lot of businesses have reopened. How much of our revenues have come back? And the answer is it depends by category. On the real estate tax revenues, they're pretty much back all the way. The slippage mostly happened in terms of prior year revenues, largely because when the tax claim office down the street is closed, people can't get in, they can't pay their taxes, and when it reopens, they're able to do that. Permits and fees, it seems to, at least the projection here is that you'll be back very close to where you were before the pandemic started, maybe even a little better than that if you look at the 2019 numbers. Earned income tax revenues are not all the way back and have not come back in even kind of a linear way. So that will be something that you have to continue to monitor, because unlike, in a growth economy, you would say, okay, it was 2%, it's 3%, I can project that out. Here it's up 3, up down 3, down 4, up 11, down 10. I mean, it's really all over the place. And then on the admissions tax, obviously, there's a more conservative projection there. But in short, some of your revenues have come back from the pandemic. Some of them have not. So I'll take this one. On the expenditure side, I don't think there's an awful lot here to talk about. Your salaries and wages are higher in this year's budget than they were in 2022's budget than they were in 2021. For obvious and good reasons. There's negotiated salary increases for the employees. They're reflected in the budget. The budget doesn't anticipate any layoffs or headcount reductions. So you basically take the same number of employees, you add the wage increase, and you get a bigger number. Premium pay, a little bit of an increase there, also related to the collective bargaining agreements. When police officers and firefighters make more in their base salary, the amount they get paid for working on holidays also increases a little bit. Fringe benefits, this is the other side of the weird change in the employee contributions to health insurance. There's kind of two ways you can budget this. You can either budget everything that the city spends as an expense, and then everything that the employees contribute as a revenue, and have those two numbers, one on the revenue side and one on the expenditure side. Or you can mush them together, and you can have this spending on the expenditure side and then take the employees' contributions out of that and kind of net it out. It looks like you're moving, for years you've had the one on the revenue, one on the expenditure side. It looks like you're moving towards having it all on the expenditure side, and that's fine. Really, as long as someone is able to answer the question, how much are employees contributing and is it close to what we expected? As long as someone can answer that question, the accounting here matters less in the budget presentation. But that's why you have the drop in the fringe benefits. It's not because everybody's health insurance magically became a lot less expensive. Debt spending is up. I think you had, Tamar, did you have something? I thought I saw you wave your hand.
I did. I'm sorry, Gordon. That also reflects a significant discount that our broker got us on our prescription drug benefit. And that discount in 2020 was about a million, and in 2021 it grows, and then 22 it grows as well. It should be
Right.
around 1.5 million in 22.
And then the rest of your picture, the debt is a little higher. I think if I recall correctly, debt was dropped in the 2021 budget because of the debt refinancing at the end of 2020. And so this is just, coming back from those savings that we had talked about as being kind of limited in duration. Operating expenses, that's a big number, and $130,000 is not something worth a lot of discussion, but you can see where the changes are, and then the transfers don't really change from year to year. But I think this is the last slide. Let me check here to make sure. Yep. So we can go back to anything anybody wants to talk about there. But overall, your picture is your budget's a little higher. You expect some of your revenues to come back, but not all of them. You're budgeting for higher expenses, which is mostly salary increases that were collectively bargained. And other than that, the one-time savings that were in the budget for debt come out. But if you look at this from a 5-year perspective, those things are going to be okay. It's okay to do salary increases that are collectively bargained if you look at them from a multi-year perspective and look at whether you can afford it, not just the salary increase in 2022, but can you increase it? Can you afford it in 23, 24, 25? Because those salaries don't go back the other direction. Same thing with debt. You can do things with debt that get you savings a little bit in 1 year, but the saving, you got to pay your debt off at some point. So the way to look at it is both in terms of what's the change for the current year, or for, in this case, for 2022, and then how does it look like going forward? And that'll be probably the last thing, we can either come in and talk with you about that in December, once you're done with whatever adjustments you're going to make. We could do it in early January. The timing is up to you. But that's where we would come back and say, okay, the 5-year projection, the look forward, which you guys have wisely used to kind of guide the decisions you're making on your current year budget, this is what that looks like. And that's what we got.
Okay, Gordon, I have a very important question to ask you, because through the budget process, we've always talked about the caps, which is something that PFM has given us good guidance on. However, there's nothing to be the person, except for our own external or internal controls, to say, are we going to stay within those caps? And the reason I bring this up is I know that in many departments in the city, they feel understaffed.
Mhm.
Okay. And it is very easy to be able to say, okay, we need to hire more employees. But then if you go to do the 5-year projections, where does that take us if we don't stay within those caps?
Right. No, you're right. And the salary cap era ends next year in July. I mean, the Act 47 enforced salary caps, where you can't spend more than what's in the plan. And we do this painstaking, break the budget apart and put it back together. And we check the negotiated proposals between both parties, and the arbitration awards and the contracts all have to fit within the caps. That protection, unfortunately, goes away when Act 47 does. So we'll have some directions and some thoughts on how to continue to have some of those same cost control provisions in a non-Act 47 environment. But Councilwoman, you're right. The challenge as you negotiate contracts, and it'll be next year, you'll actually start negotiating those contracts before we leave, because you should start in the summer. You should start around July 1st, and then we would leave a few weeks after that. But the key thing there will be not just base salary, but headcount. Because for years that's been more or less controlled by the Act 47 plan, and it won't be as of whatever, mid-July of next year.
If I may, this is Mayor Moran.
Sure.
I want to start off by saying that that's a great question by Councilwoman. In fact, it makes me realize how pleased we are with the city's ability to manage program and salaries, given the current parameters by PMF, which again, I want to thank over and over and over for their assistance My appreciation for their work and professionalism is something that I don't take lightly. And so does the administration. So, the fact that we have shown that it can be done with maintaining, the caps accordingly, and being able to work a budget that is so, somewhat appropriate. I know that we'll be able to continue. In fact, I'm looking forward to exiting Act 47 as a testament to the administration's hard work and the ability to manage the finances under the most challenging times in the past 75 years. And that's all been done because, again, I don't want to sound redundant. The professionalism, the suggestions, and the parameters given by PFM, and also the ability to work very closely with council. And again, kudos to council publicly for assisting and making sure that that's followed accordingly. So again, I cannot say thank you enough.
Thank you, Mayor. So Gordon, real quickly, because I'm in a kind of a distracted window here, but a couple of things. Yeah, I think the whole switch out of Act 47 really underscores the need for the continuity in the years to come, at least for 3-4 years. And I'll talk to the mayor and Jamar on Thursday about your organization. I just, it's impossible to retrain anybody on this exercise in the fashion that we're doing it. The other issue I wanted to cover, the medical costs, I don't care how they're broken out in the budget, but what council does need on an annual basis is an eye on the overall costs, just so we have reference to that, so we can see the actual costs.
Yep.
And then the third item, two more items. The earned income tax, it doesn't surprise me. I just think there's a lot of people afraid to go back to work right now, or who have been subsidized, incentivized to the point where they don't want to go work, at least right now. I would expect 2022, God willing, to go in the right direction, unless for some reason this, we take a turn from the worse with the pandemic. And then my fourth comment, and I know I forgot it. We DEIT, boom, 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 boom. What was the other issue? Oh, I wanted to ask you, Gordon, if there's any way you could get us a 5-year spreadsheet on the as presented, at least a rough draft.
Yeah.
Something, you don't have to present it yet, but something we can look at, because I think it's important we know those numbers as we're going through the budget, and then we can have you come back with the final budget numbers and give us a walkthrough just before we consider passing it, if that's possible.
Yep, that's an excellent idea. We'll put that together for you. That's fine.
All right, that's all I have. Sorry, Marcia, I'm distracted here.
No, I was just looking to see whether anyone else has any questions for Gordon. I don't see any hands up. Okay, I'm just going to concur with Jeff. I think we need to be able to look at how we maintain this discipline, and it isn't a matter of just having PFM no longer needed. We need to have a plan in place, so we have either working with the auditor or however it needs to be done. We need to have, because I've seen it happen before we went in Act 47, when we weren't having that type of scrutiny over the budget. We were just given numbers without any real projections. I think we have a very committed staff, and I think that, I want to commend our financial staff, our auditor and such, for working so closely with PFM, and for you to, Gordon, and your staff to give us such good guidance. But we need to be able to keep on that. It's very easy to backslide. As any of us know, changing behavior, it takes time and perseverance. So I just want us to be able to almost have a barometer for ourselves about, are we staying in compliance the way we did when PFM was overseeing the process? Donna?
And just going along with that, Marcia, I think we've all taken pride in the surplus that we have and how strong it is. But we can't look at that as, as something we can pull from. We've ordained how much of a surplus we need to maintain. That's there for a reason. We can't look at that as just grabbing money out of it, things like that. I'm sure we wouldn't, but that surplus can look very comforting.
Yeah. Something for you guys to think about, which some other cities have done and you've done in the past is, if you're up above the $30 million range and the minimum or the council policy is like 22, do you want to take the difference, 8, 6, 5, whatever it ends up being, and do something different with it other than just let it sit there, right? Do you want to put it in your retiree health insurance fund? You probably don't need to put it in your capital budget because you have the combination of ARPA plus capital money, and you've got a very large amount of money there. But an actuary would have to answer this question, but is there any benefit to putting it in any of the pension funds? Do you want a stabilization fund for health insurance? Since you are self-insured, it would make sense to take some of that money and set it aside so that, heaven forbid, in a year where you have a lot of cancer cases or whatever, you don't get crushed financially. There are lots of different things you could do. The city routed some of it towards your housing strategy in the past. You could do that, which doesn't fit quite as neatly in the capital budget because you're not building something up, but is still useful. Conversation worth having. What do you do with that reserves other than just let it sit there? Because none of us are getting any interest on that. That's not really the point of it anyway. But you could probably put it to a little more strategic use than where it is.
And I guess the other issue is when the commuter tax goes away, we need to plan for our capital budget needs too.
Right.
Projecting out.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions? Okay. I'm going to really miss seeing you, Gordon. We'll have to have like a little Gordon icon just to pop up when we need someone to be looking over us.
That's
Same
right.
thing.
I think
with
we
you,
have to do a
Ashley.
going away party in July, Gordon.
Well, I hope that the announcement of you getting out of Act 47, I hope that will be virtual, but we'll see what happens.
You can still come down for a little party, Gordon.
Yeah.
Sounds
We'll
good.
get you a room at the DoubleTree.
There we go. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the next component on the agenda, we're ready to move into the budget review, which I believe is looking at the police budget. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamar. I had asked, because we were having a little problem with our city website, that everyone got an email with the most updated budget in case you didn't have a chance to download it before the website sort of became a little quirky. So I'm hoping everyone has that in front of them. Jamar?
Yes, Counselor, just 1 second, please. Pulling up the right spreadsheet to share. If everyone can see my screen, we are in tab 9 of the budget book. Should read as page 18, Police Department Criminal Investigations Division. That having been said, starting at the top line, row 532, salaries account for the contractual increases in that division. That also includes holiday pay and longevity increases based on step. Of the more significant variance increases, rentals and leases increased by $2,000. Contracted services increased by $3,660. Of note here from the chief, we previously didn't specify the line item that the Vice cell phones were paid out of. The Vice unit handles confidential informants and that sort of activity. And so we don't track them on our main city account. For instance, that would include my city issued cell phone. So the increase of $3,660 under contracted services is to reflect the cost of the Vice cell phones in particular. Only two other things of note. There was a decrease under maintenance agreements of $890, and then an increase in general plant supplies of $2,000. If there are any specific questions on criminal investigations, I open them up and welcome the chief to respond to them. Councilor Cepeda Freitas. I couldn't hear you, Councilor.
Jahani,
Now,
Yes.
you're on mute now. You're okay.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Part-time wages cover.
Part-time
See
wages.
that? Yep. Go ahead.
Just one moment, please. Chief, part-time wages under criminal investigations, I believe that covers the secretary, is that correct?
Yes, that covers the confidential secretary as well as the court liaison officer. It's a part-time position who handles all the court documents that go back and forth between the district attorney's office, the courts, and the police office. So they handle subpoenas for all the magisterial district justices for the common police court, and assist them in the central records office with getting documents back and forth to the appropriate offices.
Thank you, Chief.
Mark, the fringe remains inaccurate on here as well, right? That we're fixing that later.
Yes. The last update on the fringe, we updated the rates. We just have to account for any officers that have left the department and substitute in names for new officers that have joined this year. With that, we will move on to the next division. Special services. Again, accounting for contractual salary increases under the salary line, holiday pay, and then longevity lines. The salary under civilian, under special services accounts for the radio room 911 call center employees, as well as central record staff. They are all AFSCME employees. So we reflect them under civilian. Overtime is remaining the same for both the division of special services as well as the civilian section of that unit. Part-time wages also remaining the same. Printing, we have a decrease of $3,000 under rentals and leases. That's because we've consolidated a majority of our copy machines under the purchasing office contract, as I mentioned, I believe last week. Under contracted services, we have a decrease there. That is in, Chief, can you remind me, that is in the cost of, for contracted services under special service?
Yes, we were paying a multi-year reimbursement to the county for our new radio system. That is taking that into account, removing that from the budget. That system has been paid off, and a couple other adjustments in contracts where the fees that we're paying is actually a little bit less than before. But the bulk of that, nearly $94,000, is from the payoff of our radio system.
Thank you, Chief. Under maintenance and repair of equipment, there's an increase there of $5,000 attributed to firearms and the range. Maintenance agreements, there's an increase of $12,622 there related to the benchmark software and TriTech, which is the current vendor that we're transitioning away from. There is an increase of $24,000 for general plant supplies. That is attributed to certification costs, battery replacements, and the handheld radios, and most significantly, ammunition costs. For anyone watching supply chain issues, ammunition cost increase is $20,000 alone of the increase of $24,000 for that line. With that, that's the bulk of the changes for the special services division. I open up for any additional questions for the chief or myself.
Yeah, this is Marcia. Just clarification, the Special Police Academy versus the regular police academy.
That's the Youth Police Academy.
So is that what's being, the collaboration with Olivet's Boys and Girls Club then?
Yes, Counselor, and that's the city's portion of the cost.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Counselor Cepeda Freitas.
Can you hear me or no?
Yeah.
On follow up to Marsha's question, does that the Junior Police Academy, does that amount cover staff?
Actually, just a clarification there, that the Youth Academy is actually under the admin budget. That Special Police Academy is a checking account that we use to where costs are reimbursed for things like the academy graduation and different items. So the Youth Academy is actually under the admin budget that you'll see a little bit later. And that does cover some of the costs of the part-time administrator. Also, some of that program is funded through a grant.
Thank you, Chief. I
Question.
apologize if I spoke out of turn. But
And this section also about part-time wages. What does that cover?
Part-time wages under the special services includes our VSU, the Video Safety Unit, part-time employees, and also part-time employees in our communication center.
From the civilian part-timers?
Yes, that is correct. We have no part-time police officers, sworn officers. All the part-time positions are civilian.
Chief, so I noticed even in the criminal investigation, the post-retirement benefits, are we anticipating people retiring? Is that why we've allocated that money there? Or if someone can explain that, please, for me, please.
Post-retirement benefits include the post-retirement medical benefits that employees receive upon retirement. Jamar can probably explain how that works into each division budget a little bit better than I can.
for police, yes, it is reflective of the medical benefits paid to retirees or covered for retirees.
Anticipate the number of officers that will retire this year?
It's unrelated to that, Counselor.
Jamar, I'm gonna
I'm
ask
trying
you a
to understand
question to
it.
help clarify, because I know the history of this. Is it true that at one point we were paying post-retirement benefits for people who had been employed as police departments, and we're still responsible for paying some of that?
I know the issue you're thinking of tying it to, Counselor, but it's not related to that. So
Okay.
on that one, we did remove those officers that were working at the county from our insurance coverage, but that's only until they leave service at the county, and when they go back into retirement, then they can come back under the city's plan and be covered for medical benefits.
Is that reflected in that line item or somewhere else in the budget?
So that is reflected under other post-retirement benefits for police officers, yes.
Okay. Does that help clarify, Johanny?
Thank you.
Maria.
Oh, thank you. Oh, no, I just want to say that for the Youth Academy, the city have to budget, I don't know, whatever, the city had to budget it for that line item because the city received some grants from outside agency, and in order for the city to be in compliance, they had to budget for the share, for the city share.
Yes, I misspoke. That's budgeted under the admin division for the Youth Academy.
Okay.
Under the patrol division, again, accounting for all the contractual increases. 1 second, I just need to shrink that box. Including the clothing allowance. We're projecting a decrease, and we don't want this to go hidden, an overtime expense of $30,000. for next year. That's based on our meeting of the budget line for this year. And we're not foreseeing an increase in the use of overtime under the police patrol division. Other increases, there's an increase of 25,000 for gasoline. Again, if anyone has checked the pump in the last, this entire year, actually, it's reflecting the market trend there. Again, we have to make adjustments on the fringe benefit line. It shouldn't be reduced by that much. We just need to adjust the officers that have left, as well as the new officers and the plans that they've chosen. That'll be fixed by the next time we meet. Maria.
Yes, in 2020, according to the Audubon Bank Company, the city budgeted 20.5 million for police patrol personnel and only spent 23.6. So there was a saving of $896,665. Chief, could you say why the saving was by that much?
Yeah, we were short a lot of officers then. Those figures you see where we are under budget for salary and benefits is because we're short personnel. We're not at our full complement of 168 sworn officers.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Johanna has her hand up again.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Counselor?
Sit down. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Reed.
That's just, and this is a small thing, but looking at the veterinary services, do we have veterinary, we have pet insurance now or canine insurance in terms of dealing with the cost of, of our canine officers?
Chief, can you speak to that? I'm sorry, I don't know anything.
No, we just pay veterinary services we can. There is really no, like the vet insurance that you get for your own pet isn't available for working dogs.
Okay, I know we had discussed that at one point, but I can't remember the answer.
Yeah, I believe it was cost prohibitive for what we actually pay for veterinary services, because the vets that we do work with give us a pretty significant break on prices.
That's great. And I know it's a small item. I just wanted to ask the question. So thank you, Chief.
I do have a question about the police pension. I see that there is a reduction. Does that have to do with how we're managing the funds now that we were able to realize that reduction? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, so that comes through the updates to the MMO. Also realizing the savings that I believe were projected back in the 2016 actuary report. Councilor Goodman-Hendershitz, those decreases are reflected there, yes. Also, we're looking to schedule the next round of valuation reports, I want to say in January. Conrad Siegel is going to have those ready for the body to review. Under police administration, again, counting for the increases, some adjustments there between the chief and the deputy chief as well. There is an increase on consulting services of $3,800. That is to reflect the increased cost of psych exams, as well as a revision to the general orders, which are the department orders by which the chief runs the department, similar to the annual update to the the ordinance that Linda does, the codified ordinance book. My apologies. That's what I was trying to say. The only other increase is to the dues line of $424. Chief, anything else to highlight on the admin division of police? And
No,
then
I believe so. Other than that, we kind of mentioned it before, the junior police academy line, that is the youth academy line. So there's $25,000 budgeted there. We also, the Berks County Community Foundation allowed us to roll over a grant we received because we weren't operational during the pandemic. So those funds they're not reflected in there because it's not coming out of the city general funds, but we have a significant amount of funds in place there to get things back up and running.
Let me bring the grid back up. Councilor Cepeda Freitas.
What is the required amount of money to run an effective junior police academy, and how many young people is the cap, I guess, on the young people that can participate in a given year?
We've found that $25,000 is a pretty good operational expense to run the academy. We've had upwards of over 30 cadets in the program before. We are currently going through the recruiting process. We have, I believe, we're up to 41 applicants right now. We'll go through interviews and some additional process with that. But I'm confident that if we would stay at those 41, we'd be able to manage that with the funds we have in place.
The grant combined that it takes to run this program? And do you have an officer assigned, or is it a civilian position?
So we have a part-time employee who works for the Olivet Clubs, who is the program coordinator. And she reports to the deputy chief, who is in charge of the youth academy.
There's one other change I wanted to note for the police department tonight under the CIP capital improvement plan, the system and software upgrade line. We needed to increase their 2022 budget by 150,000. This is to reflect phase 2 of their CAD RMS project, which will include a data transfer of everything from the current system into the new system that is still in the process of being created and set up. With that, are there any additional questions for the police department across all divisions and/or capital tonight? Councilor Cepeda Freitas.
Staffed within the department, right? What's the number? Is it 155 out of 168, Chief?
Currently, we are, I believe, around 153.
So I know in the past, we obviously, prior to Act 47, there were well over 200 officers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Act 47, what are we projecting? What is the size projection of the police department that we want to have? Numbers of our population has increased according to the census. So I'm just curious how we're going to expand and enhance our police department.
I mean, honestly, that comes down to the financial side of things. You know, what can the city financially support in terms of size of the police department? There were studies before that showed we should have a police department of about 250 officers. There's some statistics out there with the FBI, you know, police officers per 1,000 residents. But I mean, really, it comes down to the financials. That, you know, we could do a lot more, be a lot more effective with some of our programs and things with more officers. But the reality of it is the fact that we're authorized at 168 and we rarely are at that number because of retirements, officers resigning to go to their places. So even if we'd be able to support those numbers financially, would be able to maintain a roster of that many officers is the second question that comes into place. And I just got an update from my admin assistant. We're actually sitting at 152 right now.
Also, I hesitate to say it, Counselor, but any expansion of the department, we would have to discuss the thorny issue of tax increase to pay for it.
Big time.
Councilor Goodman Hendershitz and Council President, that's all we have tonight for the budget review.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond, and I thank you, Chief, for giving us the perspective. When I asked the question, when Gordon was presenting, the question about the caps had to do with, let's say we wanted to increase the number of employees in any one category where we thought there might be a need, how that impacts the overall budget, with the reality being that it's still hard to maintain the number of people, even if we wouldn't increase the number of positions. So it talks about how you need to be innovative with what your reality is. And I know people have common concerns about how that impacts with the police, with response to calls and such. And we just need to be recognizing the reality that we're living in now. And I believe if the chief had his druthers, he would probably have all the positions filled that are budgeted for. That's just not possible. So that was just my comment. Anything else from the body? Because this is all we have to present tonight. Am I correct, Jamar?
That is correct, Councilor.
Okay, so if there isn't anything else for the good of the order, we can be adjourning the meeting. Or do we need to revisit where we were with the solicitor?
No, we're good to go. Is there anything else anybody has for public discussion? If so, can you guide them through that, Marcia? Otherwise, you can adjourn.
I thought we had a parking, didn't we have a parking element on the budget? Parking discussion, or was that moved?
No. We're having Nathan come in next Monday.
Okay, because it still reflects it here. Okay.
Oh, then that's,
Oh, no, excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm looking at November 8th. My apologies.
Yeah.
All right, Marcia, if there's no other business, you can adjourn the meeting.
We can adjourn. Thank you very much, everyone, for
Thank you, everyone.
have a wonderful evening.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hmm.